Hello, friends. I'm Tom Downey here, joined by ESPN Radio's Todd Blackledge. Todd, thank you so much for stopping by.
My pleasure.
All right, so Georgia, Bama, the big game. What do you make of it being two SEC teams once again?
Well, I think that they both obviously earned the right to be here. It's interesting because a lot of people around college football and really around the country thought the SEC was down this year. I think it wasn't as strong, from top to bottom as it's been in other years, but certainly these two teams have played outstanding football. So it's kind of been a year when people thought the conference was down. The top two teams are playing for the championship.
You think having the two SEC teams, and again, we kind of saw that earlier with Alabama and LSU, could that kind of lead to some tweaks to the way the playoff is currently set up?
I think a lot of people were suggesting that. There's a big difference between this year and what happened when LSU and Alabama played. Number one, they didn't play in the regular season, Alabama and Georgia. So they were clearly the two best teams in the league, even though Auburn beat them both. But they didn't play already, and so there's a lot of intrigue because of that. And then I think just the whole mentor and student, that whole dynamic with Kirby Smart and Nick Saban makes it a pretty compelling game.
Smart has spent so much time under Saban. Do you think that gives him at least a bit of an edge, or at least some help in terms of the way he preps for this game?
Well, you got to believe, with all those kind of teacher-pupil kind of things, that maybe the teacher has always held back a couple things. You never know. But Kirby has been with Nick longer than anybody and knows him, knows the process, knows their personnel extremely well. So that has to give them an edge, but it's a short week. You can't overcoach and overanalyze anything too much. They've got to do what got them to this point. But I think his knowledge of their personnel, and not just him. You've got Mel Tucker, his defensive coordinator, was also at Alabama. Glenn Schumann, the linebacker coach, was at Alabama for a long time. So they're very familiar with Alabama and how things are done at Alabama. But it's still a matter of blocking and tackling tomorrow night.
Talk a little bit about these individual teams. We'll start with Alabama. What do you think is their biggest strength as it appears against Georgia in particular?
Well, I think their biggest strength is they've been here and they've done that. They've been in the playoffs every year. This is their 6th playoff game. So they have that experience. Their quarterback was in this game last year for Jake Fromm. This is his first time in this game, even though he's a very poised guy. And I think the biggest thing is their defense last week looked like what we expect Alabama's defense to look like. They were struggling down the stretch. They had trouble stopping the run against Mississippi State, against LSU, obviously against Auburn in the game they lost. But they were beat up a little bit at linebacker position, and they looked worn down in their defensive line. They didn't look that way against Clemson. They were fast. They were furious. They played with a chip on their shoulder. And even though they lost another guy in Anthony Jennings in that game, they look like the Alabama defense that wins championships.
Let's hope you got a bunch of 5- and 4-star guys waiting to come up.
Yeah, well, they had two guys in Christian Miller and Terrell Lewis, who they lost in the opening game against Florida State, who they got back really in a full measure against Clemson. They were back for the Auburn game, but that was the first week they had practiced. They got a lot of reps during the prep time leading up to Clemson, and so they're fully in the fold now, and I think they'll play a big role tomorrow night.
All right, same question for Georgia there. Then what's their biggest strength going into the game?
The biggest strength right now is, they kind of believe this is a magical season. They're ahead of schedule by everybody's account, with Kirby Smart in his second year. They had a couple seniors that made a decision to buy in and stick around, and they've had monster seasons. Of course, Lorenzo Carter with the blocked field goal, Michelle and Chubb both had huge games in the Rose Bowl. So they're a very confident team. They feel like this is a special year, and they're playing that way. And the quarterback, as I mentioned earlier, he does not play like a freshman. I mean, he is a very poised guy. And even though they have relied on their running game to this point, which has been outstanding, he is going to have to play well for them to win. Alabama's not going to let a running game beat them in a national championship game. It's going to have to be Jake Fromm throwing the football.
Is there one player versus player matchup that you're watching for the most in this game?
I don't know if there's one player versus player matchup, but I am interested to see what Jim Chaney, the offensive coordinator, does with his quarterback in terms of getting him comfortable throwing the football. Will they throw a lot on early downs? You know, how do they manage staying out of third and long situations? But I really think the passing game of Georgia, which has kind of been an afterthought at times this season, is going to have to be front and center tomorrow night.
We'll start with Georgia for this one. If there's one thing that they're maybe the most concerned about, thinking like, oh, if this doesn't go right, we're going to be in big trouble, what is that for the Bulldogs?
Well, I think stopping Alabama running the football. I think that's where it has to start for them. They have to really try to put the game in Jalen Hurts' hands and make him beat them throwing the football. I mean, very similar to what Alabama will say and try to do when they're on defense. But I think that'll be the key for them, is not allowing Alabama to get their running game going. And you know, in the Clemson game, Alabama was really efficient on first down against an outstanding Clemson defense. And when they were good on first down, that allowed them to be in very manageable third down situations. And that plays right into the strength of Alabama, because they can run it. And Jalen Hurts, you know, you don't have to put him in a lot of at-risk type situations. Plus, he has that ability to run and scramble when it's third down and 5 or less. So I think Georgia's key thing is defending Alabama's run on early downs.
Let's make this last one very quick here, but the same question for Alabama. What's their biggest concern?
I think the biggest concern for Alabama is just that, you know, they got to get pressure on that quarterback. They got to make him beat them throwing the football. So they have to, you know, Alabama's done a great job against the running game historically under Nick Saban, but these are two outstanding dynamic backs. And so their biggest thing, you know, they were excellent against Clemson. They're excellent normally on gap control. You can't be out of position against either one of these two backs, Chubb or Michelle, or they can make big plays.
All right, folks, that is ESPN's Todd Blackledge. Todd, thank you very much for stopping by.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
Good.